Well, welcome to the Great Basin Desert. So you're in the Western Great Basin, the largest desert in North America, about 110,000 square miles into which water comes and never leaves again, which is why we call it the Great Basin. Right now we're about 20 miles outside of Reno, Nevada, and you can see this mountain behind me that's covered with snow is Peavine Mountain, and the city of Reno is just on the other side of that hill.
So the first thing, when I was doing my research about your book, I came across a little video of you driving and also not driving your truck across the desert. What's the story there?
Yeah, well, when I travel around the country to read from my books, I'm trying to help people imagine what a Great Basin desert landscape is like. And one of the things I always say is we have these dry lakes, these playa basins that are incredibly flat. No sticks, no holes, no rocks, no weeds, nothing. They're the most isotropic landscapes on the entire planet. And you say that to people who've never seen the Great Basin and it doesn't mean anything to them. So I try as a storyteller to come up with stories that'll help them imagine this. So when I'm traveling, I always say, well, let me give you a sense of how big and flat these lake basins are. You can go out there in your truck, set your cruise control or jimmy your accelerator, climb out the window of your truck onto the cab of the truck and drink beer and just let your truck drive itself randomly across the sublimity of the most isotropic landscape on planet Earth. And people couldn't picture that, or they thought that wasn't being accurate. So I made a book trailer where I do that. I get my truck going about 45 miles an hour. I climb out the window onto the top and I sit back and read my own book and drink beer and let my truck drive itself across this playa basin. It was so fun to make.
So what's the title of your book and what's it about?
Yeah, well, this book is one of 3 books of creative nonfiction that are written about this part of the world that you're seeing here, this beautiful Great Basin desert. The first is called Raising Wild, and that was about my wife and I raising our 2 daughters out here in this remote desert. The second one is called Rants from the Hill. It's a series of essays from the hill in the remote desert where we lived about life there, wildlife, neighbors, etc. And the new book is called How to Cuss in Western. And these books have to do with family, environment, and humor as well. So How to Cuss in Western sounded like a fun way to approach some of the topics I was interested in that book. Raising Wild, Rants from the Hill, and the new book, How to Cuss in Western, sort of form a trilogy that are interested really in 3 main things. One is family, and I really am interested in how a family can operate in the wilderness. There's a real tradition in American literature of men alone running off into the wilderness, right? So Huck Finn goes to the raft on the Mississippi, or John Muir disappears into the Sierra, or Henry Thoreau goes out to Walden Pond. Men by themselves leaving their families to go have these experiences in nature. So I'm really interested in how that narrative changes if you take your family with you when you retreat into nature. So my wife, 2 daughters, and I moved into a remote area of the Western Great Basin Desert, and that's where our family life has prospered. So one idea that is in all the books is why family is important and why it's interesting to be in a family that's in the wilderness. And then the second thing is to try to give people a sense of what the Great Basin Desert is like. It's a landscape that's often misperceived and misunderstood. If you say desert to any American and ask them what they picture, they'll say sand and saguaro cacti typically. But we have Hollywood to thank for that. The Mojave Desert is proximal to LA, so if you are making a film or you're making television, that's the desert you're typically going to shoot in. So here we have this 110,000 square mile high elevation cold desert in the Great Basin that people really can't picture, and when they do picture it, they picture it often as a kind of vast wasteland. So in my books, I'm trying to get people to reimagine, to kind of question their standard of natural beauty and reimagine why this place is so special. And then the third thing that all of these books are concerned with is humor. I really believe in the kind of healing power of comedy. And environmental writing can get pretty serious. Environmentalists, we take ourselves pretty seriously, and we fret and worry and mourn an awful lot, and then we're angry some of the times when we're not in grief. And I really think it's important for people to remember that humor can not only bring us together and make us more resilient, but it can do really important work as well. So what I'm trying to accomplish in all of these books of creative nonfiction is to think about my relationship to my family in a wilderness setting, to help people to imagine what the Great Basin Desert is really all about, and to remember that it's okay to laugh, even when we're dealing with really serious issues. People often ask where the title came from, How to Cuss in Western, Like most parents, I use profanity in front of my children and shouldn't. So like most families, we set up a swear jar. And I realized pretty quickly I couldn't afford that. It got out of hand fast. So I got really interested in the idea of, well, you know, did people use profanity in the Old West? And so that's where it came from. I did some research into what kind of cuss words people used in the Old West, and that was kind of what launched the title for the book. I can read you a passage of it if you'd like.
Please, go on ahead.
I like to think of myself as a New West kind of guy, but all this regularizing and penalizing of what I view as an essential mode of self-expression caused me to wonder what the tradition of profanity in the Old West might have been. Well, I looked into it, and it turns out the pedigree of swearing in the Old West, and such swearing was once referred to with the beautiful phrase, air in the lungs, is in fact quite distinguished. Profanity, slang, vernacular, hyperbole were once woven deeply into the fabric of Western life and manners. In fact, many of the flamboyant expressions pioneered by early cowboys, miners, gamblers, prostitutes, and others are still part of the American lexicon. We all know what it means to be a bad egg, or to be bamboozled, or to have a bee in your bonnet. We remember what it means to be buffaloed, to be in cahoots, or to get something done by hook or by crook. After all, if you don't cool your heels, you might end up dead as a doornail. You may have a hard row to hoe, note to millennials, row, not road. But if you have a mind to pony up, instead of being a skinflint and making tracks, you might end up with enough coin to shake a stick at, instead of winding up tuckered out and mad as a hornet. Gold miners taught us that although we all want to hit pay dirt, not everything we attempt in life will pan out. Cowboys reminded us to first hold our horses and then to strike while the iron is hot. Trail cooks suggested, none too politely, that we should quit our belly aching. Sheep herders helped us to see what it means to be on the fence or dyed in the wool. And they also crafted their stories into yarns, which they spun, sometimes in order to fleece the listener. As a writer and a certified curmudgeon, I especially appreciate that early printers expressed the feeling of being out of sorts, a term that refers to the grouchy mood brought on when a printer runs out of letters while setting type. It might be just as well that we've let a few of those old sayings fade into trail dust. For example, it may be wise that we no longer refer to facing a difficult undertaking as having big nuts to crack. All in all, though, we've lost more than we've gained. I wish we still referred to procrastination as beating the devil around the stump. I'd like to be able to say when I'm in a hurry that I'm about to mizzle, burn the breeze, spudgel, light a shuck, marble, cut dirt, put my licks in, or best of all, absquatulate. And why should I apologize for having forgotten something when I might instead say that I disremembered it? A term that's more honest, since my selective memory is actually a subversive form of passive resistance. For example, I seem to routinely disremember my youngest daughter's elementary school talent shows, where if I were so unfortunate as to remember them, I would be subjected to an interminable lineup of kids breathlessly shrieking out awful pop songs in voices that could worm a sheep. So in looking into the Old West and realizing that the language of this landscape is so rich, and I'm always so impressed with the environmental beauty of this place, but that's braided with a kind of cultural beauty, and that beauty is often expressed in language, much of which we lose over time. So it was a fun experiment to kind of resuscitate a lot of this old cussing.
And compared to other nature writing out there, what do you think is unique about your work, and what void are you trying to fill?
Oh, I really appreciate that question. There's so many environmental writers whose work I really appreciate. I think probably the thing that's been singled out the most about my books is that they introduce humor into environmental discourse. There are some writers, a lot of people will think of Edward Abbey, a hero to a lot of Western American environmentalists, but generally speaking, nature writing hasn't really been willing to laugh. We take ourselves pretty seriously, we take our mission pretty seriously, and I'm trying to convey that humor isn't just comic relief, that important work can get done through the use of comedy.
And what would you say that mission is?
Well, I mean, for me, it's a mission of awareness. I have always felt that if you want to protect the natural environment, you can't begin with a sermon. People protect things that they fight for things they love things they've experienced. So for me as a writer, I try to come at my readers from a starting point that isn't to lecture them or even to even necessarily to educate them, but to begin with, let me show you this thing that I'm passionate about and give you a glimpse into why. And then together maybe we can build from there toward a new kind of appreciation that can lead to environmental concern.
What do you want your audience and readership to walk away with?
Well, I think the most important thing to me would be to realize that this landscape is special, that it's valuable, that it's important. And then I think also to understand that it's okay to laugh. I think that many of us feel like our daily lives are challenging, that our political life is challenging, our economic life is challenging, and humor is a real healing force. When people are able to laugh, it not only makes them stronger, it gives them a form of resilience that I think helps them to encounter the other problems that invariably they'll confront. Well, also, when we don't understand desert landscapes, that has implications for how we treat those landscapes. So for example, Nevada is proposed as the main repository for the storage of all the nuclear waste that we've created around the entire country. Well, nobody's going to propose putting nuclear waste in a field of flowers or on a snow-capped mountain or by a sparkling lake. But if you perceive this landscape as not being aesthetically beautiful, then it invites the idea that it's a good place to dispose of things. So I think that in addition to trying to educate people about the beauty of the desert, I want them to feel that there are political implications to what they think is pretty and what they think is barren. And so nuclear waste storage is one example of that. But landscapes will always be protected or be destroyed based on our aesthetics. So part of my work as a writer is to help people adjust their idea that this desert is barren or empty and help them appreciate how beautiful it is.
So any closing thoughts that you would like to add?
Yeah, I guess I would just say, look at this landscape around me. We're right on the edge of a city. And I think there are not very many cities in North America that have what Reno has, which is, a wonderful community of people, a wonderful arts community of musicians and artists and writers and brewers, but also that we're right on the edge of this vast wilderness and that we're in this ecotone. We're on the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada mountains, so we look up at snowy mountains, and we're also just on the western edge of the Great Basin Desert, which is this incredibly vast and beautiful expanse of desert. So that combination of desert and montane landscapes, easily accessible to a city that is as wonderful as Reno, it's really special. I think of the natural environment as being a crucial determinant of what life is like in our home city.